You had done that. All right.
Turn yourself off.
Okay, can everybody hear me now? All right, I'm no longer a silent film. All right, welcome back to the Reclaim Open Learning Symposium. I'm Liz Losh of UC San Diego, and I am delighted to be moderating the panel, the first panel that we have 3 groups of awardees here representing their open learning initiatives. I'd like to remind everyone who's watching the live stream to please use the Reclaim Open hashtag, which is super awesome, so that we can follow the discussion that's taking place on the internet. So I've been writing about the open learning movement for the better part of the past decade. And I think one thing that's really interesting about our present moment is that we have a lot of people who are talking about open learning from the position of the armchair. So these are people who have never actually been instructors or students or experienced the sort of complexity and messiness of interacting with actual learning communities. And I think, or participating in situations in which access or openness is being negotiated, which could be something that, as the previous panel pointed out, something that's very difficult to define. What's exciting about this group of 3 awardees, 5 representatives here, is that these folks on this panel have done a lot to actually participate rather than pontificate. And so I'd like to start by having them introduce themselves and their projects to the audience. So let us know who you're trying to serve, how have your goals changed over time, and what does open learning mean to you? So maybe start with Jonathan on the end.
Okay, so my name is Jonathan Worth, and the project that I'm here representing is hashtag Phonar is how people will see it on their screens. That's the tag for photography and narrative, which was ostensibly a course about photography that exists within a closed undergraduate degree. And it kind of set out to explore what it means to be what a sustainable practice is, what it means to be a photographer in a world where everyone is a photographer. That's the journey it set out on, and that was in 2009. And 4 years later, we're now in our 5th iteration about to start, and the course now is very much about visual literacy and digital fluency. So it's about understanding that one needs to be an artisan, one needs to be a credible source and a credible witness, a trusted source, and one needs to be a publisher as well. It's no longer enough to be just think of yourself as a supplier. You need to be a publisher. You need to reach people. Most want to hear about what you've got to say. So that's where the course is now. Is there anything else you'd like me to say about it?
Well, what kind of learners have you managed to interact with, and how have you seen the project evolve over time?
So it started when the course, it was the first time the course was run. The course was brand new, so 9 people sitting in a room. That's and one of the complaints was that we want more feedback, and so a quick way to do that was to put the course on a blog. So from 9 mostly mature students, we went quite quickly to significant numbers tuning in online to see what this course was about. Now, over the course of the last 4 years, the people that have taken part range wildly from amateur photographers, existing students at other courses, undergraduate students, postgrad students, and professional photographers. And then we have rock stars as well. I mean, then that's really exciting. When a student who has come to study photography with perhaps some aspirational dream of one day getting to maybe assist or be like a photographer, like, let's say, Annie Leibovitz, to actually come along on the course to find out that photographers like them are actually tweeting along their comments as well, commenting on their photographs. And then some of them go on to assist these people and build working relationships with them. So there's a full smorgasbord of people getting involved.
Cool. How about digital storytelling?
So my name is Martha Burtis. I'm with the University of Mary Washington, which is a small public liberal arts university in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And I'm representing a project called DS106, which is the affectionate name for an open online digital storytelling course/community that we sort of run out of the University of Mary Washington. It started about 2.5 years ago It grew out of a credit-seeking course that we taught there at Mary Washington. My colleague Jim Groom taught for 2 semesters called CPSC 106, which was a kind of 100-level digital storytelling class in the computer science department. And Jim was doing some really innovative things in terms of online presence with students in that class, and decided in spring of 2011 to open it up and invite anybody who wanted to kind of play along with the activities of the course. And it's just kind of grown since then. We taught it in 2 credit-seeking course sections that spring and had a couple hundred people around the world sign up and join the community. And since then, it's evolved in a lot of different ways. And answering the question of how have our goals changed would presume that we had goals going into it that I could really clearly define for you. We have kind of an ethos in my shop, Teaching and Learning Technologies at Mary Washington, of putting stuff out there and seeing what happens. And that was sort of the approach with DS-106. And then iterating constantly upon the model and trying out new things. So we've taught DS-106 in a lot of different formats, both in terms of online and face-to-face, but sometimes we also teach it as a summer camp with fake characters who come to summer camp and do strange things, and we kind of build narratives on top of the course as a way to explore storytelling even further. And I think our ethos of open, as Alan alluded to in the previous session, really has to do with exploring the open web. So working in educational technology, sometimes one of the things that frustrates us most is seeing that our use of the web can be highly kind of restrictive, and our understanding of how we act on the web can be highly restrictive. And we want students to be working on the open web and participating on the open web and sharing on the open web, and that's part of the kind of core value of the course. Alan, I don't want to skip anybody, but did you want to like jump in and add anything I forgot to that?
A lot of pieces. I mean, I'm Alan Levine. I'm not even employed by University of Mary Washington, but I seem to be working on DS-106. So I think people get infected with what this is. And it looks pretty silly from the outside, often what we do. So we often get accused of being like just the fun people. But there's a thing that happens. And one of my favorite examples, I mean, how this course works is that there is a class going on at Mary Washington. There's this open cloud of people, but they're not necessarily replicating the same experience for this wide open audience. So they can pick and choose how much or how little they want to do. So it's not saying like you can take this class and get the same credit at Mary Washington, or you can take your experience and like somehow get a badge and say you've graduated from DS-106. People choose to have this experience, which is kind of insane because it's a lot of time. And even for our students, the main feedback that we would always get at the end of the semester is, my God, this is way too much work for for a 100-level class. This is insane. And then it goes on to say what an amazing experience it was because of how they're applying their work elsewhere. The thing about the goals, Martha said it perfectly. I mean, we wanted to experiment. I mean, we see the entire web as an experiment that we continue to do. So most of what you see in DS-106 has evolved as we went rather than being outlined. We had some brainstorms in the beginning, but the course was already rolling, and we decided we should have a radio station. And someone built us a web radio station. And we have a whole community of people who just participate in this free-form radio station. So for me, it exemplifies, like I said earlier, everything about the excitement of discovering this. It is a web of opportunity. And it's the way, I don't know, open is everything that I don't even think about anymore that, oh my God, we're being open. It's just the way of being in this course. As a small example, so an instructor who was teaching at Temple University in Japan named Scott Lockman, he was teaching a class on cyber history or something like that. It's not even a course like ours, but he mapped his course to our course. His students were blogging and mixing it with ours. And we had this thing called an assignment bank. So instead of saying, you have to do this assignment this week, students can contribute and choose from the assignments in there. So there's one called, it sounds silly, it's called Patty Pioneers. So you're supposed to find an image of a pioneer of the internet and create an image of them with fast food in their hand. So there's a picture of Alan Kay with a giant, ridiculous McDonald's hamburger. It looks silly. And you think about, why would anybody do this? But what it is, it's a great entree to understanding who Alan Kay was and why he was important. So this kind of mixture of the playfulness of what we do in terms of what students then are learning as they're creating, to me is the magic sauce.
And I think we have one more set of introductions to do. Speaking as part of the working group, one of the things that we really tried to do was make sure that students were included and that we didn't make this just a faculty-driven initiative. So I am delighted to have you guys introduce yourselves.
Okay, I'll go first. My name is Jade Ord, and I'm a senior at Scripps College, and I am representing Femtechnet, the Feminist Technology Network, who is offering a distributive, open, collaborative course, also called the DOC, that's being taught at 18 nodal courses across the country. And our goals for creating Femtechnet was to bring together scholars, artists, and students that were passionate about science, technology, and new media. So that's kind of our goal. Both Susie and I were in the beta test group that was the class that was offered last spring. And then we both interned for Femtechnet over the summer, and then Femtechnet just launched the 18 courses at the beginning of September. So it's kind of, yeah, almost gone through its first month, but that's how far along we are.
And I am Susie Ferrell, and I am a current junior at Scripps College. And I think one of the greatest things about the doc, the Feminist Dialogues on Technology, is I see, and I know Jade sees, and some of the other students who were in the course last semester, is really how open it has been. I know that this project has been a really big part of my school so far at Scripps. It's ongoing. I'm personally working on editing videos and resources for the course, and it's really great to be able to help and contribute in a very finite way.
Great. You know, in introducing yourself, maybe add one more piece where you might talk a little bit about some of the assignments. So you've talked a little bit about the emergent radio station. So what are some of the kind of, what you think are the signature assignments that you've created that have really sort of created their own communities?
Starting with us?
Yeah.
So the initiative, the specific project that I'm in charge of for this semester as a peer TA is the wiki storming, which is bringing students onto Wikipedia and making them editors. And obviously we're focusing on contributing to articles that are women-related, feminism-related, and creating new pages, editing pages, taking non-sourced information off pages. We're working closely with Adrienne Wadowitz, who's, we like to call her the Wikipedia goddess, and she is affiliated with Wikipedia. And we had our first Wikiathon last week, actually, where as a class, our class at Pitzer College came together for 3 hours and edited Wikipedia, and then it'll be an ongoing project throughout the semester. So that is kind of, we've had a lot of positive feedback about that project and also negative, which I think is kind of exciting in the way that it means that we're making waves. So that's the initiative that I'm most closely in charge of this semester.
And what I've been working on is sort of some ongoing student assignments of keyword videos. And these videos are short 2 or 3 minute responses to longer panel discussions by the professors that are being used as resources for the courses. And the objective of this is basically to get student input into the discussions we have every student have a set-aside period of time where they can talk and they can share their opinion on a certain subject. And that's another of the main sort of key projects in the doc.
Great. Maybe from the other groups, what do you think are some of your signature assignments from which other educators might learn?
You know, there's a whole bunch there. One of the things we've done this year is we've added something called Phonar Ed, which is Phonar for Educators, which is somewhere where people can dip in and ask questions about running their own version of Phonar. Something that Philip Schmidt and Nishant brought up earlier on, which was this idea of forking which I think is a great way of thinking about remixing. So we're hoping, and I think it was Nishant said, Open leaves us the potential to remix and fork methods as well as content. And so one of the things that we're doing is hoping that people will perhaps take those tasks, take those lessons, and then remix them and transform them or adopt or adapt them, whatever. But this idea of forking things, of taking something, making it better, but not losing the attribution trail. That's kind of one of the things that gets built into lots of our tasks. For photographers, that's quite a difficult thing to deal with. We're used to producing a very scarce product that no one else can replicate, and our value traditionally has been in this thing remaining scarce. So to develop a program of learning where we rethink that product, the image is very different to the artifact. The artifact is fixed in time and space, and you can charge a lot for that because people value its provenance and so on. Whereas the image gives us a whole different set of values, different set of things that we can exploit. It can live in lots of places all the time, and lots of different environments, and it can create networks for us. So all the tasks will deal with these things in different ways. How do you retain value when you allow someone to remix your stuff? What happens when you remix someone else's? How do you then realize a value from that? So it's difficult to pick one task out, but there are a whole bunch in that I hope people would take and make better and then share back.
Great. So DS-106 has kind of spawned a number of kind of what you might call ancillary projects that complement the core course or experience. And one of those, a few years ago when we started class, we used to use a site called The Daily Shoot as a part of the course. And the idea of The Daily Shoot was that it would give you a photography prompt every day. And your job was to go out and take a picture addressing that prompt. And after a while, about a semester or two into teaching the class, that site went away. And we were kind of trying to decide what we were going to replace it with. And my colleague, Tim Owens, working a lot with Alan, actually developed a new site called The Daily Create, which gives creative prompts every day. So it's not just limited to photography anymore. It's also audio projects and writing projects, video projects. And the idea is that what we're trying to do is get students into a habit and to develop a kind of a habit of creativity. And to stop thinking of the creative work as sort of this very precious practice that they have to sit down for 3 hours and work on this big project, but rather that this is something you should be engaging with every single day. And in talking about DS-106 to people, sometimes we get the reaction of, well, that approach, the whole DS-106 approach, that's fine for a digital storytelling class, but it's not applicable to the sciences, or it's not applicable to economics, or to this class I teach in the English department. And I actually think the Daily Create, if you just generalize it, is a wonderful idea that you could apply across lots of different disciplines and domains. And the idea of giving students daily prompts to do small pieces of work, just as a way to exercise those muscles, so that they stop thinking of the coursework as they develop a more natural rhythm to the work that they're doing in the course. Did you want to give any others?
Stole my topic.
I thought you'd talk about remix.
See, this perfectly moves into my next question.
Wait a minute,
So
I have something to add.
Okay, go ahead and add.
Less about the specific assignments, but kind of the approach we take, because I find students come into these classes, they have an assignment mindset. They're asked to do something, they produce it, and they focus on the end product. So a lot of time when they start, and we're asking them to publish on their site, and they have a visual assignment, and they say, here's my animation, and that's all we get. And what we were interested in more the process behind it. So a concept that I borrow a lot from a guy named John Udell at Microsoft is this idea of narrating our work, and that's what we use our blogs for, is to not only present what we do, but present like the process to how we come about it. So for our registered students, we don't necessarily have like a matrix by how we grade or rubric, but there's 3 things we ask for. We want to know, like, what was the idea behind it? What was the inspiration? What's the connection? And why did you choose to do that particular? Why did you choose, Star Wars to be your particular theme for your movie remix? The media itself, which needs to be embedded in the site, and then we want to know how you made it. We want to know the behind the scenes, the making of, and we find that's really important for students, not only to be creating, but also to be narrating and doing the meta thinking and sharing about what they're doing, because it's valuable for other people, it's valuable for them when they go back and look at the work they did. So a big part about what we're promoting is people not only creating, but also writing about what they're creating.
Great. Well, as was pointed out yesterday, the first prominent MOOCs tended to be by computer scientists and for computer scientists. And one of the things that we in the working group noticed about the submissions that were coming in that promoted connected learning is that we were getting a lot of submissions that actually highlighted the arts. So there's been a lot of discussion about how open learning facilitates education in science, technology, engineering, and math, or the STEM disciplines. And there's also been some discussion about like putting that A in there, so it becomes STEAM. But what does it mean to really sort of think about the arts as a way to facilitate public engagement? And I think it's particularly interesting because I know from talking to you all yesterday, most of you would not identify yourself as someone who cultivates arts practice and might describe what you're doing as something different from the arts. It's activism or it's storytelling, and so how do you negotiate that relationship with art making?
I'll jump in. And actually, mostly because what you just said resonates so deeply with me, because I should mention as kind of a side note, this first semester when Jim opened up DS-106 and said, hey, world, come play along, was the very first time I'd ever taught, like a class at all. So he basically gave me a model to work with that was completely different from any kind of traditional model. And it was anxiety producing to be teaching for the first time, of course, at all, but to be doing it in this completely new context added a whole other kind of layer to sort of sift through. And one of the things that I struggled with is that I don't consider myself probably in any way an artist. I mean, I think of a lot of the work that I do as creative work, and I think of myself as a creative, but I don't self-identify as an artist. And teaching a class like digital storytelling, which has huge media production component to it, and a lot of students, I think, come into it anticipating, even though it's a computer science class, there's this kind of, well, what is this? Is it art that we're doing? Is it storytelling? Is it computer science? And so for me, the way that I approach that is, harkening back to what Alan just said, is really, really focusing on process. Is that what I was really interested in was not so much product driven, that they could create that perfect video or that perfect mashup or take the perfect picture, but that there was a development of process and that they were able to explain that process. Because to me, that gets at learning on a meta level that can be applied in so many different areas of their lives. That ability to be able to explain why we do what we do and how we got to the choices that we made is a skill that we should be more explicitly teaching students and doing more of. And so this was a context in which to do that. That happened to also be fun and creative as well.
Great. From some of the other teams?
I think it's really interesting because my background's not as a teacher either. My first class I opened open because I didn't know how to teach it, right? So I said, how do we teach this? So I opened it on a blog. But I think therein is the answer to that question. Why is that important? I mean, I don't teach in a school of art. I teach in a media school, so it's a school of language. But I think one of the strengths of this way of teaching and learning is that it's heuristic as opposed to algorithmic. So you're not just, it's not enough to be a photographer because the mechanical barriers to entry are gone. Everyone's a photographer. The equipment solves that. So there's no point just learning process, how to make great photographs technically. So you have to learn to problem solve. And so opening my class out on a blog, the problem was I don't know how to teach and I don't quite know what to teach. That solved the problem, asking other people. The network solved that problem for me. So I think the feedback, the concrete outcomes and the feedback that I've had from predominantly, students that don't have English as a first language, students that don't come from a traditional academic background, and students that have learning difficulties such as sort of heavily dyslexic students, they'll say that this very varied way of teaching and learning is hugely beneficial. The fact that the class can be asynchronous, they can download it, or they can record it, or they'll get it audio this time and written next time, and then a movie next time, or I might ask them to respond to a problem and make a film about it, as opposed to, and rather than write a thesis, in fact, maybe they're going to give a symposium or they're going to make a radio show. So perhaps the arts question, perhaps I don't know, maybe we have more of a license to do that? I don't know, I've never taught science. But I think there's just I don't think that can be the case if it's just a lack of creativity, if you're not using these things to your advantage. But that's certainly one of the strengths, this idea of heuristic as opposed to algorithmic teaching and learning.
Science is so easy. Actually, that was my training. Actually, this whole thing about art, like it comes with this big, giant capital letter, and I can't tell you how many people start our experience, both our students, with that same thing. Oh, I'm not creative, or I'm not an artist. And when we get to the part of doing audio, to a T, every student but one in my class, because she's famous on YouTube for doing voice animations, but they say, I hate audio. They've never done anything with audio. And so what we end up doing a lot of time is just breaking down that barrier of what people come in saying what they can't do. Over and again, I don't know how to edit video. It's so complex. And we kind of provide a safe way for doing this. And I think we do it we mess up in public. And so I mess up in public all the time. And on our live radio station, we have a sort of a philosophy known as futzing. So you get on there and you're like, is this thing on? Oh, and your mic is crinkling, and it's totally unprofessional. And once people sort of learn that this is kind of a place where we don't have these high standards, like I'm supposed to be an artist and this is supposed to be good, it gives people a chance through the daily create and some of these activities for people to flex their muscles. So I see people come in who say, I only like to write and I'm scared to put myself on the internet. And I've seen countless people just broach that a little bit and they get wider and wider. And next thing you know, they're putting their face, in a Google Hangout where they never thought they would do that. And to me, that's the greatest joy of this class, is sort of seeing people overcome their own barriers to expressing themselves online.
Can I just come in there? Because I think we're sort of skipping over something that's really important, is that one of the things that I've found is traditional sort of learning seems to be that knowledge is parceled out from behind a lectern and you get it as a finished product and you consume that. Whereas one of the things that I think we do, perhaps unintentionally at the start, is that everything we do is in beta. You say you make mistakes. Yeah, I make mistakes all the time. There's a button on our class site that says, when I make a mistake, please press it and tell me how I can do it better. But what I find there is that people are much more willing to let you make mistakes because they know that you're asking for their help. And so this idea of drawing people into a process of learning rather than feeding them a product is definitely one of our strengths, I think, that anyone can draw on if they're confident enough to make mistakes in public.
We had an incident last spring when Jim and I taught a class together. Our students set up their blogs, and they all got hacked. So everybody's site, including my site, had this black message that said, Omre 528. I always get his number mixed up. Yeah, and so that would be devastating. I mean, that was the thing that folded the Georgia Tech MOOC. And we said, this is an opportunity to learn. So what is a hack? What do I have to do to protect my site? And we turned him into a character. So I actually made a Twitter character, and students, we turned it into what we call a sock puppet. And we sort of folded that into the realm of what we do. So we're always live in this course, and we're changing it week to week often, depending upon the activity that people are doing.
And how about the role of the arts in Femtechnet? One of the founding participants in Femtechnet was Beatrice da Costa, an artist who describes her work as actually citizen science rather than art. So you want to say something about the arts?
Yeah, so I am a student of art and art history in school, and I am very much so a visual thinker. I learn really well through looking at the way that artists communicate through their works. So in Feminist Dialogues and Technology, we're utilizing artists' works and artists' papers as resources. And I found those to be really a lot more open to interpretation than some of the more, some of these sort of finite academic readings that I often do in courses that have one way to be interpreted. So coming from that, I see that as a really direct form of openness. There's an openness both to new and different resources and utilizing artists' works, as well as an openness of the way that the works can be interpreted.
I was also going to add that Femtechnet utilizes art to create community in a way that is very different than doing a blog post each week on the readings that are required. For example, we have a culminating project at the end that's a craft exchange, where you create a craft based on one of the main keywords. There's one keyword per week of the course. So you create a craft in like the flesh and blood, like something that you could hang up or put on the wall, or it could be a video, and you actually exchange it physically with a student that's doing the same keyword video as you in a different nodal course. So you may end up sending your craft across the country to NYU or Bowling Green State University, and also receiving a craft in exchange. So that's kind of an example of how students are able to reclaim what they're learning in class that may be very like highly theoretical, and show how it applies to their lives. And you can see, for example, for like the project that I did once was my keyword was machine, and I disassembled a laptop and made a unisex baby mobile out of it. And I displayed it and shared it with people, specifically that year with BGSU, and it was a really great culminating experience to see how the work of theorists was being applied to students' lives as well, and how they were applying it.
Great. Well, encouraging users to be content producers can create a number of technical, infrastructural, institutional, ethical, and legal challenges. So what happens when you flip the pyramid of information flow and really empower your students to be massive content creators? How do you manage all of the headaches of intellectual property, of digital archiving, of consent and privacy, and all of the other things that you have to negotiate when you're dealing with rich media files?
That's a lot.
One of the things I think that DS-106 does really well, and I think that we try to do, is this idea of digital citizenship. It isn't just enough just to give people the tools and say this is how you do something. You have to be with them and hold their hand and show them how to be a responsible individual in those environments. How do you manage that stuff? Well, I think practically, from my experience, it was not an option. Server space, why remake Facebook when Facebook does Facebook really well? It's the sort of thing that big institutions love to do. They love to say, well, let's remake SoundCloud or Twitter over here. And so I think one of the successes of the things that we've done is that we've done it on a budget, because we've gone where the fish are already swimming. So when you go to Twitter or you go to Flickr or SoundCloud or Vimeo or all these different places where the students are already comfortable existing, you don't have to get them to change their existing habits. What you do instead is you get them to reflect on them and think, well, is this an appropriate way to behave now that this is a living resume, that this is a living portfolio? And so those questions of teaching in appropriate ways to behave, they kind of solve themselves along the way. When you point to someone and say, you know what, was that really appropriate? Did you really want your employer to see that? Because they will. Then they solve it themselves. I think I think this is kind of the fabric of teaching online, something one has to do. You don't just teach how, you have to teach why, and learn at the same time, because I'm new in a lot of these environments.
And frankly, you don't really manage it. I mean, there are things you set up. You want to set up some suggested ways of doing this, but they're going to find out by crossing some lines occasionally. I mean, we've not had any. We had one case, I think, where a student did a pretty inappropriate topic for their radio show, and instead it was addressed in class. I mean, it was painful in some ways, and it's always when we get to the video unit and students start downloading clips and remixing from YouTube, and then they get the notice, and they're like, what's going on? I have this fair use. I have the right to do this, and it's a very valuable experience for them to go through that. And some of them just kind of, subvert and say, okay, I'm going to take my thing down. They told me I can't do it. And we really want students to question, why is this happening? Why can't I make something new at a piece of media that's a piece of our culture? It doesn't always happen, but we want them to sort of question why these things are happening to them.
I'll often get feedback or pushback from people when we talk about this overall approach, and they'll say, well, you're telling them to get their own domain names and set up their own web spaces. What if they say stupid things, or they say things they regret, or what if they violate copyright? And the only real response I have to that is that when they graduate, they're going to go do those things, right? And at least when they're in our class, we can be there to intervene and help them understand why their video got pulled down.
Turn your mic on.
I put it on. Oh, I'm sorry. So we can be there to intervene and help them understand, why did your video get pulled off of YouTube? Why was that maybe not a great choice? We can have those private conversations. Just because the class is happening in the open doesn't mean I don't have private conversations with students. Doesn't mean I can't meet with them or email them privately. And while that's uncomfortable and those conversations can be hard, I feel like that's kind of our job, is to have their back for those 4 years while they're here at the institution, help them in these spaces and help them to understand why the choices that they're making in these spaces matter, so that then when they do graduate and they're in the real world, the choices they make out there come from an informed place.
And Feminist Dialogues on Technology also works a lot in video, and we encourage our students to make the media that they produce downloadable so that people can take it and remix it into new videos if they need to. So far, we haven't really had any issues with students wanting more privacy for their works, but we did make a conscious effort when choosing the platform for our videos to take into account what would be best for communicating these sort of academic high concept ideas. As opposed to YouTube, we chose to go with Vimeo because it is sort of a smaller, more artistic community, and we felt like that would be more comfortable for the users.
And kind of like what you were saying, like having the students in the classroom where they can come to you with questions if something kind of goes awry. Same thing goes with editing Wikipedia. Wikipedia can be a very hostile environment, especially if you're self-identifying as a feminist in that space. So we are doing as much as we can to protect our students, first of all, but second of all, there will be cases of harassment or just feeling uncomfortable in a space. And at least in this way, we're able to provide somewhat of a support group to talk through those issues, talk about how you can respectfully respond or decide to remove yourself from that space, which obviously we're not hoping for because we're wanting to make our footprint in those areas. But yeah, like you were saying, I think it's not like we want everyone to be a Wikipedia editor, so might as well teach them now how to combat that versus like, oh, I guess they can figure it out on their own when they've graduated.
And they give up.
Yeah, exactly.
And our approach where students are managing their own presence, I mean, it dissolves the whole FERPA issue because they're in control of that. So they don't have to represent themselves with their name on their site. So we have students who make up, fictitious names. The best part of the semester is when you see the domain names that students pick out. It's wildly creative. So they don't have to put their name on it. That's completely in their control. And that's a different experience than they're used to. They're used to the institution providing that as a resource. And now we're saying, hey, you go manage that.
I had a student last summer. She was actually in Alan and ours class. I think she was in the summer class last summer, who was from Afghanistan. She was an exchange student, and she was very uncomfortable with the idea of putting her identity out there for all kinds of kind of cultural reasons, that she was concerned about what the impact could be on her life. And we talked privately, and she came up with sort of a pseudonym. That was her domain name. That's how she published. That was her Twitter handle. I knew who she was. To all of her classmates, she was that pseudonym, and that was it. It wasn't an issue, And then on her blog, her choice as to how much personal information she put out there, how she identified herself, if she put pictures of herself up online, that was entirely up to her.
So I'd like to throw things out to the audience a bit because we have people who from JAGA here who are also concerned with the question of the role of the arts. We have Professor Juhas, who has taught a course about social media, on social media, and people from many initiatives that might have productive conversation that we could facilitate. So love to hear from you guys here in the audience, or if, Mimi, there are any questions coming up from the internet that we should be fielding.
That's quiet.
We have a lot of appreciative comments.
No questions.
Well, then read us our comments then.
Yeah, come on, lavish some praise.
Can I ask a question there? There's something that Nishant said yesterday, and he said, and it really scared me because I hadn't fully thought through the consequences of open at this point, and I'm sure there are plenty more unknown unknowns. But this one now is a known unknown, the right to delete, the right to light the fuse on all that work and just have it obliterated. And I haven't put that in place for the students that I've done, and I don't know how to do it right now. This terrifies me because I'm about to enter into another open class, and I can't knowingly do it now without having some touch paper there in place for them. And you know, I wonder how other people sort of think about this. I mean, I'm aware that yeah, there's a lot of value in the data and so on, but I'm just thinking now about a footprint.
We have one of the goals of DS-106 really on sort of a meta level is we're teaching them something about digital citizenship and owning their digital identity. And one of the things that's kind of hard, I think, for us is to accept that part of owning your digital identity means you get to decide when you want to disappear, and when you want it to go away. So at the end of the class, it's up to them whether or not they keep that site that they built live, whether they register, they renew the domain name. And a lot of our students don't. And that can be really disheartening, because sometimes they're doing great work, they're putting wonderful things out there. We can't imagine why they don't want that to persist.
It breaks my heart to see broken links. It
and
just
also
anguishes me.
I'm less bothered by the mess doesn't bother me as much. But I think, for me at least, my philosophy has to be that if we're really saying that this is about personal empowerment, then part of that is they get to decide to delete. And I just hope that when they do it, it's based upon what they've learned in the class, and that they're making a choice based upon what they've learned.
And I'm always curious, we don't get a chance to ask why that happened, because I've gone back to look at my students' old sites. Occasionally one has done a complete makeover. It's like, wow, I didn't even know you had this in you. And then other ones, just the day after class, it's wholesale flush. And I don't know if that's the concern over what that content represents for them, or if it's just, oh, this is what happens in class. The class is over and I'm done.
It goes away, which is kind of sad.
I actually surveyed former students who were deleters to try to find answers to that question, because often some of the most exemplary student material that you want to use as models for other students is deleted, which poses a challenge. And what I found out was that students have a lot of different reasons. Sometimes they're in careers like teaching, where they have a sense of public identity that has to be very managed, because they worry about who sort of sees their internet self. There were some students who felt like it was juvenilia and that they had kind of moved on beyond then, and they wanted to really sort of show who they were now rather than who they were then. And there were other students who just felt like there's this whole genre, I think they're called goodbye films, where people who play video games on the internet create these films where they sort of say, it's like a montage of great gameplay, and then they sort of say, great playing with you, goodbye. And for a lot of those students, they sort of felt like it was of a particular time and a particular place, and they weren't part of that community anymore, and it was time to kind of move on and start participating with a different community and have a different set of public engagement.
And some of those sound like really legitimately good reasons. And I think part of it is that we layer on top of this our own expectations and our own practices, and assume that they will have those same expectations and practices, and they don't necessarily.
And I think we have time for one more question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to comment that it's been really nice on the Twitter stream to see your communities of learners also showing up, and is a real testament to, I think, the networks that you've built that are very resilient outside of the immediate class context. So that's been very cool, and we've gotten a lot of praise for the panel. Just on this visibility issue, I wanted to raise a question that actually came up earlier in the tweet stream, but I think is relevant to this conversation about whether in these open learning contexts, undocumented queer and trans students are at risk.
Yeah. That's a really, I think, important question, and one that has already come up for Femtechnet. Also we have, in the nodal course I was teaching, we had students who were creating work about disability as members of the disabled community themselves. And those were works that exposed, they were works about vulnerability.
Right.
And I think that it brings up a lot of complicated issues. Maybe in your nodal class, did you feel like people did risk-taking that they wouldn't want to go completely public?
I think they did, and we created a really safe space in the classroom and then on the commons, so far it hasn't gone like anywhere mean or terrible like that, but I mean, there's always, since the videos are public and the work is public, or if someone randomly came across the Femtechnet comments, like it could go somewhere bad quickly, but I'm not aware of anything that's happened like that yet, but I'm sure, sadly, it may be just a matter of time as the doc grows, but yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the plan will be on how to kind of take that on, except that I know all the nodal professors and instructors are fully committed to protecting their students in any way they can. But.
And there was some sort of discussion. I know that, especially in the digital art world, it's really dominated by male artists, and having a sort of anonymity to gender or to other aspects of your persona, sexuality, anything like this, it can be sort of helpful to leveling the playing field or the platform for which an artist displays their work. The sort of creation and curation of an artist's page can be dictated by themselves, and they won't necessarily be lumped into this group of women artists or queer artists or something like this. And so I think that anonymity can be useful in that way.
And we did actually have a question right there. When I was pointing, I was actually not pointing to Mimi, so. Okay. And I guess Alex has a question, and then but fast.
Okay, thank you. I was thinking about, and so I started tweeting, but I haven't sent it yet, about performance of self in everyday life. You know, Irving Goffman's thing about front stage and backstage and putting together the public face and performance, and how the retention of work from the past, of yourself from the past, of your ideas that you were chewing on in the past, keeps contextualized or outdated or somewhat private or specific entities in front stage in perpetuity. And I wonder a little bit about living our lives constantly in the front stage.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone has an answer to that, so.
It's not all on the front stage.
And then Alex had you want the last word?
I love the last word. I think I follow up on your comment, which is to say that front stageness, that openness, we're thinking about openness today. My student Jade mentioned a lot of the feminist thinking that we work through in the class about safe spaces. You use the word safe spaces, and I think that this tension between a democratic desire for openness and transparency, which we also talked about this morning, and at least as I understand it, a feminist call to producing the communities of interaction, the communities of learning that feel the most safe to do the dangerous work of becoming public, becoming agents. You know, that tension between safety and transparency seems to me very important. Openness and closedness in a certain sense, and when it's actually okay to close a space off, and what the rules internally in a classroom might be about closing. I think that's equally a part of the conversation, and it's not an anti-democratic move or an anti-openness move. It's actually a profoundly important move to produce a more radical kind of openness. If a person needs those 3 steps to get to a position of safety or agency from which she then might open the door, open the window, or become transparent. So I think that that's just really important for us to continue to talk about safe spaces as well. And of course, feminist discourse has been talking about that and pedagogy for a long time.
So Claudia just pointed out that we actually have a little more time on the panel. So maybe I'd like to hear from our panelists. What are some specific techniques that you could use in order to facilitate those kind of safe spaces? Although now a trendy term has become brave space. So it's like, you know, how do you create environments in which people can also understand that they're doing things that are risky and sometimes feel nervous about them and yet still succeed. So how do you create safe space? How do you create brave space in an online community?
I can start us off. In as much as there's one particular point in the phonar class, so phonar, photography, and narrative. And one of the lessons that I share with the students that I teach is that there's something that no one ever taught me, and it's the gravity of the role of the storyteller, the moment at which you have to tell somebody else's story. And it's very easy to be a technician. You know, if you're trained as a technician, go and take someone's photograph. It isn't until you're faced with someone who says, I've had my children stolen. And this is, you know, I've been trying to get in the newspapers for months. And this is, I don't know where they are, and so far down the line, but this is it. This is the opportunity. This is the moment at which they're going to be on the cover of a newspaper or a magazine telling their story. And they tell you their story. And you're trying to block this out, trying to just think, how can I make a nice picture? How will people warm to this person? How will they be moved by her? How can I make this picture? And she tells you the story, and you're absolutely devastated. And of course, in that moment, you then have to turn around and make a photograph of this person, which has space above it for a headline, and space down the side for text, that is going to move people, that is going to draw them in to want to hear her story. Now, no one ever told me that. So one of the things that we do in the class is we have a class where we say, next week you're going to tell someone's story. This week, you're going to share a story with the rest of the group that you've never shared with anyone before. And what we do is we close the class. So they get a week to prepare for this, and they can talk about anything they want. There's no pressure to reveal something that may be too upsetting. Nevertheless, the experience, what we unpick is the experience of telling a group of people something that you haven't shared before. And in that moment, you're incredibly vulnerable. And then we say, okay, well that's what your subject's going to feel like next week. Imagine if someone else was telling your story, telling it to everyone else, and you were entirely powerless at the moment of publication, because that's what happens. So that experience we found is very sort of valuable in learning about the gravity of the role of the storyteller. And in a sense, I hope it speaks to this idea of, you know, when we put something out there, how it feels, especially when we're putting something out there for someone else.
And I think that goes back to the point that Nishant made earlier about the importance of affect. And I think it's a really tricky thing to figure out how to model empathy and how to negotiate that in these highly mediated situations. So maybe it might be interesting to how have you guys tried to handle that in digital storytelling? And
Well, I actually wanted to follow up just for a minute about this question of what we can do to, and I guess the only word that I can think of, you use the word agency. And so I see our role, whether we're creating safe spaces, I don't know that I can say that specifically, but I do feel like one of the things that we are doing in DS 106 is working on empowerment. And a lot of the way that the experience is constructed and the way we talk about the course to students is one about giving them a sense of agency over their presence on the web, which is not an insignificant thing, right? So they come into the course, usually most of our students, with a presence on the web that they've built, but they have not ever really reflected on what that presence represents or what forces have pushed them to represent themselves in particular ways. You know, that the questions they answer when they fill out profiles on social media sites are engineered questions. That's not just somebody who wants to get to know you, right? And those I think are really important issues that we need to be addressing with our students about their engagement with this space, with this open space. And I hope that they come out of the class. We do ask them to do the class out in the open, but I do hope that they come out of the class feeling as though that they made choices about how that openness was enacted. That this wasn't us telling them you will all have a space that looks and feels like this, but rather that they made choices and that those choices came from a place of empowerment that we've helped them get to.
One thing that Femtechnet does is before posting videos online to share with the entire community across the country, we normally screen our shorter keyword videos to the class. And I'm not sure if, I think maybe we're lucky at Pitzer, but the 2 classes that I've been in, a part of this project, have been very supportive and kind and positive. So no matter where the video starts out, criticism is given, but it's always given in a way that the person that made the video walks away still feeling happy with what they first did. And I think this is kind of a good buffer before putting it live, because they're given feedback, they feel good about it, but then they also see where they can improve. And then by the time it hits the web, there's a more polished, some errors maybe have been removed, just so that in the end, they feel more confident before they put it online. I think that's something that's really helped our people out.
And we don't really direct people into a vulnerable place. And it's interesting that a lot of people end up going there on their own with the things they choose to talk about. So I see students who always kind of take things at a kind of this level, and they do the assignments and they experiment and they do the things. And people come along and they, on their own, they decide to go that deep. And they don't always start out there, and they don't intend to go there. So to me, the safe space is just, they have that freedom of how much of that they want to open that up. And so we're not dictating that to them, but not in such a profound way that Jonathan described, which is totally applicable. And I've used that concept of, we get so focused on storytelling, to me always focuses on the performance part. And I've had really good success with these workshops where, okay, you can tell your story, but now I want you to tell Jonathan's story as you heard it, because the way I retell it is different. And that gets into the whole part of listening and what it means to reframe someone's story, and hopefully it gets you into some stage of empathy to that understanding. But I have to say, I totally respect the issue and think about the safe space issue a lot, but we so easily jump to oh my God, someone's going to be inappropriate. Someone's going to put porn up on their site. We come in with these presuppositions that we don't really see happen all that much. And so I see more of the amazing things that happen when people in different countries are sort of connecting and contributing, and people do break down their barriers. And it's so easy to sort of focus on those negatives, and I swim in the positive land.
Well, on that positive note, I'd like to really thank our panel for a wonderful conversation about feeling arts and user-generated content. And I hope that the conversation will continue both online and